morning, my lords, ladies and gentlemen, Prime Minister Orbán, Your Excellency, welcome to Chatham House, and first of all, thank you to Chatham House for arranging this venue this morning. My name's David Alton, and I was asked if I would chair this meeting. And also to make one or two announcements. First of all, that the event is being recorded and it's on the record. All attendees should turn off, please, their mobile telephones and put them into silent mode. And the event is also being live streamed. And there will be an opportunity after the conclusion of the Prime Minister's address for you to ask questions. I think most of you already know Viktor Orbán's biographical background, and many of you will have met him in the past. He's always been a frequent and very welcome visitor to the United Kingdom. He's been Prime Minister of Hungary, of course, in his second term of office since 2010. In October 2002, Mr. Orbán was elected as the Vice Chairman of the European People's Party, and the following year, the Chairman of Fidesz, Hungarian Civic Union. The alliance won the European Parliament elections in 2009, then went on to secure a two-thirds majority at the parliamentary elections in April 2010. The National Assembly in Hungary elected him as Prime Minister of the Republic of Hungary on the 29th of May 2010. Mr. Orbán himself, of course, has been a Member of Parliament since the first elections following regime change in 1990. I might add that, of course, he was a very prominent figure in the opposition during the period that preceded that. He graduated as a lawyer in 1987. This morning, his theme will be the role of traditional values in Europe's future. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Prime Minister Viktor Orbán.
Thank you, David. My lords, your excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, first of all, allow me please to say thank you for inviting me here today. It's my honor to address you here, and since I do not want to take advantage of your patience, and the aim of my remarks, if I understand correctly, is to invite a discussion, I will summarize my thoughts in short thesis. But before saying anything wise, I think I should briefly say something about myself. So first of all, I'm a Hungarian. I'm sure you do know a lot about Hungary. We have an intense history, and as you know, we speak a unique language. It's quite well known that we regularly produce more history than we can consume up. We have a saying about ourselves: if you have a Hungarian friend, you do not need an enemy. That proves that self-reflection and self-irony is not too far of us. But as for the future, of our most important skill is our innovative way of thinking. Just to give you an idea, Hungarians have invented the computer, the ballpoint pen, and the espresso coffee. It is not a bad composition. Ladies and gentlemen, my basic political experiences originate from the underground anti-communist movements. Later on, I won elections and I lost some as well. I have led a coalition government, and now I am backed by a two-thirds majority in parliament. This is rather rare in Europe. Maybe this is the reason why I have looked at the crisis primarily not as a problem, rather as a possibility to deliver deep structural reforms. As we say in Hungary, more than reforms, renewal of the country. By the way, Europe, in the old times, I saw Europe from a perspective from where it looked like an unreachable land. Then I chaired the Parliamentary Committee on European Integration. As Prime Minister, I led the accession talks, and I had the chance to see a European Union full of strengths, optimism, and self-confidence. I quite remember well. But what I can see now, totally the opposite. An uncertain European Union without a clear vision about its own future. So, ladies and gentlemen, let's get to the list of theses. But I have to warn you in advance. Although I graduated from a law school, I am not a lawyer. Although I have studied philosophy, I am not a philosopher. Although I have spent quite some time in a research institute, I am not a researcher either. I am basically a doer. So my thesis will reflect my thoughts from a very practical point of view. The first difficult question we have to answer is whether this place where we are right now is supposed to be a part of Europe or not. What we surely know is that if we pose this question in a political sense, the answer is yes. The approach of Hungarians towards Europe is less ambivalent than the approach of the British. For us, the European Union earlier was equal to the West, the desired West. That is one of the main reasons why we attach positive feelings to European Union, to the Anglo-Saxons also, regardless of some controversial developments of the history. Thesis number one, ladies and gentlemen, the most important conclusion I have drawn from the crisis is that it is not something that ruins our competitiveness only temporarily. It is not a challenge that we can overcome by simple political measures. It is better to acknowledge we simply cannot live as we have lived so far. To put it very simply and very straight, we cannot live beyond our means. It is often quoted that Europe's share of the world's population is 8%, while we account for 25% of the world's production, but 50% of social expenditures. This list of numbers raises a serious dilemma itself, but here comes the yet darker side of the coin. The total state debt of the EU 28 reaches 11,000 billion euros. The yearly payment of this sum with interest are more than 2,000 billion euros, and the member states of the European Union produce approximately 1.2 thousand million euros of new debt every day. Who would be crazy enough to finance a system like that? And above all, who is ready to do so from cheap sources, which are indispensable for competitiveness? So, what could be the conclusion? All major systems need to be deeply restructured. We should encourage even families and communities to change their life strategies. It has to be realized, whether we like it or not, the illusion of a society based on entitlements and unaffordable social expenditures is over. All right, this sounds brutal. And this leads to the essential question. Will the European political elite be brave enough to be honest and to tell the people about this? And here we have arrived at the necessity of traditional values, because we could consider honesty as a traditional value. Without honesty, not only are we going to be unable to overcome the crisis, but we will hardly be in a position to raise the adequate questions either. All in all, long live honesty. My second thesis. We should not neglect the difference between the member states of the European Union. If we do so, it may have serious consequences. It is obvious that after a while, members of the Eurozone cannot avoid to adopt a common budget with common tax policy and with common social policy. In the meantime, non-Eurozone countries should have the right to choose their own economic policy mixes. In this case, we just have to follow what common sense dictates. The same economic policy will surely not be appropriate for the United Kingdom, for Sweden, and for Hungary. So instead of ideology and dogmatism, wide-ranging diversity has to be acknowledged and respected. Thesis number 3. Gentlemen, if we acknowledge diversity, it means that we acknowledge the nation itself as well. Even though being very open, free trade oriented, and investment attracting, these economies are national economies. And this leads up to a conclusion of utmost importance. The concept of nation still exists, nation still remains relevant. Coming to my fourth thesis, let me refer to what a former Central European president wrote recently in his book. He wrote that there is a green and leftist political conspiracy going on in Europe against the nations. Well, my understanding of this situation is a bit different. Conspiracy requires secrecy. But I think what is going on in Europe now is an absolutely open red and green attack against traditional values, against the church, against family, against the nation. Of course, we accept that there is a room to debate issues about the future of Christianity and the church. But allow me to cite a wise Englishman who said, "We can have even basic doubts about the future of Christianity. I am sure it is not the task of politicians to kill it." Especially, ladies and gentlemen, because in our understanding, democracy in Europe is democracy based on Christianity. The anthropological root of our political institutions is imago Dei, which requires an absolute respect to the human being. As for families, here we should say a straightforward sentence. A community that is unable to sustain itself biologically will not survive, and does not deserve it either. Immigration is not an answer. It is a trick, a bluff. Most European countries, including my homeland, are suffering from demographic decline. If we have to acknowledge, demographically motivated family policies are essential and legitimate. Thesis number 5. I think it is better to acknowledge, even if it is difficult, that the concept of welfare state is over. Instead of that, we should try to build up workfare states and replace entitlements with a merit-based society. In Hungary, thanks to the policies of the former government, the inactive outnumbered the active. So what we are doing now is a true European attempt. In Hungary. We have renewed the country by restructuring the major systems. We abolished the former tax system, which had penalized work and was too complicated to be competitive. Our new tax system is a family-based flat tax system, which honors those who want to work more or to employ more people and who are ready to raise kids. We have introduced a 16% tax rate on income and a 10% rate for small and medium-sized companies. Doing this, we have killed the dogma that you can introduce favorable changes in the tax system only during time of prosperity. We have introduced Europe's most flexible labor code. We have restructured the higher education system and the vocational system in order to meet the demands of the businesses. We have been constantly fighting bureaucracy and changing the total social system. A social system which does not keep away one from work anymore. During this attempt, we succeeded in meeting the triple challenge faced by most of the European countries. We have decreased the state debt, we have improved our competitiveness, and we have been able to maintain social and political stability. When we came to office, there were 1.8 million people paying tax. 1.8 million taxpayers in a country with a population of almost 10 million. This is the best road to suicide. Now we have 4 million taxpayers, and I would like to see 5 million. And now, ladies and gentlemen, I have arrived at my last thesis. So instead of simply managing issues, what we need is leadership. a leadership motivated by vision. Hungary has great luck in this sense because our leadership is rooted in a democratic legitimacy, resulting in an overwhelming two-thirds parliamentarian majority. We can surely say that Hungary serves nowadays as a real laboratory. We try to find the proper answers to the challenges of a modern world based on traditional values. It would not be appropriate to praise ourselves here and now. That is why I am not speaking now about decreasing state debt, about the budget deficit, which has been well below 3% for the last 3 years. I am not mentioning that the amount of foreign direct investments has tripled in a year. I am not going into details regarding our record low inflation rate. I just want to ask you to pay attention to the developments in Hungary, and if you could cross your fingers, it would be a privilege for us. Thank you very much for your kind attention.
Very good. Do you want to take questions from the rostrum, or do you want
It's
to...
okay. Better to take it here. Just.
Well, we have a good period now, up until 11 o'clock, when we can take questions. There will be a roving mic, Prime Minister. There's a gentleman who's caught my eye here, and then we'll go to the lady there. Yes, you, sir.
Thank you, Prime Minister. It's Masato Kimura, Japanese journalist. There are some parallels between you and Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. So to put importance on traditional value and decrease the independence of national central bank, and strongly want your economy regain and revitalize. But at the same time, there are a lot of criticism from the Western countries. And so in Japan, some Western journalists criticize Japan is coming back to militarism. But I can't see any militarism because defense expenditure of GDP is still below 1%. And how do you think both of you should deal with such kind of criticism from the Western countries? And also, I'm very afraid the national sentiment in your country, and how do you deal with Jobbik and so such kind of long nationalist movement?
Thank you.
So, as just you have mentioned, we have quite a high number of similarities between the way of thinking of the Japanese political leadership and the Hungarian one. But we should neglect the differences, which basically came from the situation, the different situation of the two nations. You know, we don't have sea. That was not always the case, but now we don't have sea. That's first. Second, so we are a landlocked country. Second, as a result of the First World War, we lost all the territories which belonged previously to Hungary, which produced for our nation the energy and all the raw materials. So Hungary is a country which is landlocked, no raw materials and no natural energy sources. Which means that the only way to survive, to maintain ourselves and improve our quality of life, you know, could be the outcome of what we are able to produce by our hands and by our brains. So that's the reason why the situation is quite unique. It's very difficult to find any similar situated country in that sense, even in the European Union. On military expenditures, it's a long debate, as you know here. The Europeans has a double feeling. They would not like to be served by the Americans in terms of military security, but at the same time, they would not like to spend for that. It's impossible. So sooner or later, the Europeans should make a decision whether they would like to get a higher level of independence in that term or to pay for more security. So you cannot be independent from the expenditures of the other nation. That's so simple. So that's the discussion which is going on, and there is no unified or agreed point on that. National sentiment. I think national sentiment is a good thing. I don't know philosophically where you are stand for, but I think everything is good when a human being is ready to approve that there is something more important and bigger than his personality himself. A nation, that kind of thing. To serve the nation, to like your nation is a good thing. Because it means that you are able to overlook your personal interest and you are ready to do something, to sacrifice even for something which you consider bigger than just your personal interest. I think it's good. So national sentiment is not a danger. It's a positive energy which can help us to mobilize all of our capacity.
Thank you.
Jobbik. Jobbik is an important point. Nobody knows here, or not everybody knows here, what is Jobbik. Jobbik is a radical, we could say, radical nationalist party in Hungary, which is generally considered as an evidence that in Hungary there's a constant danger of nationalism, anti-Semitism, xenophobia, whatever. So this party testifies in the minds of many of West European observers that danger. But historically, you should know that this party got 16 or 17% at the last election. And if you look back to the history of Hungary, we can say that in any election, generally speaking, the radical forces always got like that. Sometimes the communists, sometimes the radical rights. So 16, 17% in the Hungarian political culture always goes to that kind of radical parties. So therefore the question is not what is about this 16%. The question is what we have with the other 84. That stabilized the country. So that's the reason why we feel not be bothered at all by that kind of developments. It would be better to see zero or something like that, but it's democracy, it's impossible. Yes. So therefore we have to live with that, and we have to have an experience how to treat it, how to handle it, and how to manage a democratic policy with that background.
Thank you, Prime Minister. The lady here, and then the gentleman at the front.
Thank you. Heather Graby from the Open Society European Policy Institute. Hungary is not the only country in Europe which has an active far-right party, which is sometimes inciting violence. We've seen this also in Greece recently, where Golden Dawn has been banned. We also see far-right movements in a number of countries which are pushing mainstream right parties further to the right, particularly on issues like migration, also xenophobia. What's your view on how, across Europe, these parties should be treated? Is it right to ban them, for example, in circumstances where there's incitement to violence or where indeed members of the party have themselves committed violent acts? Should there be EU-level involvement in this? And should centre-right parties, do you see a real threat to centre-right parties, that they'll be driven away from traditional values by these parties and actually they'll try to outflank them? Is that, do you think, a big risk for traditional values in Europe?
Thank you.
First of all, the centre-right parties should not be terrified at all because, as just you have said, attracting the traditional values, because this party does not represent traditional values. They speak about traditional values, but they don't do that. They are radicals. Radicalism, is something different. So patriotism will be never supported by them. They supported nationalism and xenophobia, which is different. It's not a traditional value, anyway. Traditional value is to be patriotic. Or to be Christian is a traditional value. But, to be extreme, whatever, political supporter of a political ideology based on not the imago Dei, as just I tried to explain, it's not traditional value. Traditional value is solely Deo Gloria, not the hubris. But central-right parties always are motivated by hubris. Sorry, the extreme-right parties are motivated by hubris and not by solely Deo Gloria. That's different. So I think the central-rights are strong enough to keep traditional values in its original form as it is. The second point is how to treat them nationally. So each nation has its own constitution, which makes clear where is the border of freedom of speech, freedom of establishing organizations, and so on. So it should be not internationalized. That's the job of the national political leadership. And the third point you have made is about the reason. The reason is not the crisis. The reason is the lack of leadership of the center-right or center-left political elite or political parties. When we are living in a crisis, the instinct of the people looking for real leadership is stronger than in the time when everything is in a prosperous situation. The problem of the European Union is that there is a misunderstanding of political leadership. And that kind of concept of leadership, which is, anyway, could work under a good situation or well-managed situation, is not the proper one concept of leadership for crisis time. So the concept of European Union, and we could say broadly in the European culture, is that leadership is institutional. Just listen to the European leaders. When we touched upon that issue, leadership, they always, next sentence, speaking about institutions and processes. And when we are living in a crisis, it's not enough. We need persons, personal leadership. So we need a good balance between institutional leadership, personal leadership, processes, and individual decisions. So if you don't have that balance, the feeling of the people is that there is no leadership. So that's the reason why we sound very empty. This is the reason why we found very empty the statements of the European Union leaders speaking on institutions and processes and so on. So I think if you would like to fight against the radicals, we should have moderate, strong leaders. That's the best way to isolate them.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Gentleman here, then we'll come back to this side of the hall and the gentleman on the front row, and then we'll come into the centre and at the back as well, because I'm conscious that you haven't had a chance yet.
Philip Blond from Res Publica. I was very struck by your remark about traditional values and economic modernisation, because it's, going back the last 20, 30 years, it's always been the idea that traditional values are the enemies of economic progress, that actually what we must do, destroy the family, small businesses, become hyper-modern. Are we now in a situation where centre-right parties can actually make an argument that economic modernisation requires traditional values? For instance, the debate about welfare, it's never in the whole of human history have we ever had the idea that people could get something for nothing. And the idea that we need to have a world in which people get something for something is popular in this country, and I think is increasingly popular in Europe. Also, the return of small businesses. It's now acknowledged that small businesses are more innovative than big businesses. They're the ones that put on jobs. Yet we followed an economic model that effectively penalises and dispossesses them. So if you look at anything from the Mittelstadt in Germany to Lombardy in northern Italy to Catalonia in Spain, the economic renaissance of those areas is based on traditional values. So two questions. Do you see a future for the European centre-right in allying economic modernisation with traditional values? And in what ways would you push it further? What other traditional values are required? I mean, the City of London, we have millions of businessmen looking for ethics but can't find any. What is your view? What is your view for the future of traditional values and economic modernisation? And what is Hungary specifically going to offer in that regard, both for itself and for the centre-right?
Thank you. Thank you, Philip.
So traditional values and economic modernisation. If we have a deeper look on what we call this crisis, we can realize that the lack of traditional values was the main reason how the modern financial system almost collapsed. So probably that's an argument in favor of the traditional values and the role they can play in economic modernization. I'm not speaking about, the bankers, which is a very popular item anyway. So the problem of lacking traditional values is just not an exclusive territory for the bankers. If you look at the American story, how the whole financial crisis started with the mortgages, I read a study saying that 70% of the American people, homeowners, falsified the information about the real value of his home. So it's the lack of traditional values, not just on the big-headed businessmen, but even among ourselves, is a problem for the future. So we can't maintain the well-being and high level of living standards without respecting certain values. And these values are human values, which means traditional values. You can't falsify the information about the value of your own property. Even if there is a good partner by the bankers. So it's not a reason to do so. So that kind of things, I think, it's part of the argument why we should calmly argue in favor of to coincide the traditional values and all level of human being and economic modernization. EPP, the European People's Party. So we have some difficulties. The basic difficulty is that we would like to win elections. It's not unnatural when we speak about political parties. But the perception of the EPP, or the, EPP is made of the member parties. So the perception of the member parties is, I can't say everywhere, but in the overwhelming majority of the European Union countries, that if they would like to win election, they can't pronounce honestly the values which are the basis for the political program. Because their perception is that somehow the European societies moved away from the traditional values, and therefore if they would like to collect more voters or more votes, they should probably lie, but at least neglect to confess about the real values they stand for. So therefore the EPP and some others international organizations which originally were Christian initiated or inspired or traditional value basis organization, moving slowly but surely to the direction of the left. And instead of accepting the challenge of the discussion on values, we just adjust ourselves, to that the so-called European mainstream. And the European mainstream is dictated not by the traditional value representative persons at this moment, neither in political life, neither in public life, neither in the media. So I don't know what is the way out of this, but I feel strongly how we suffer of them. So we should find a way out of that. What I try to do, to find a way at the national framework out of this trap. And, it's easy by two-thirds majority. The others are in a far more difficult situation, but we try to provide an example, probably, not just to run the country quite acceptable way based on two-thirds majority is possible on traditional values, but next election probably we can deliver an evidence that even you can win an election on that basis. Who knows?
We will watch with interest. The gentleman here, and then I think the gentleman in the centre there.
My name is George Igler. I'm the director of the Discourse Institute. Minister elnök úr, you spoke of winning a two-thirds majority. I think it would probably enlighten a lot of people in the audience if they understood that if Hungary elected people to parliament by the same first-past-the-post system that Britain does, your party would have won every single seat. Except two in the Hungarian.
Unfortunately.
Goodness.
I mention this because my last invitation to Chatham House was for a talk entitled Understanding and Dealing with Populist Extremism in Europe. The reason why I mention this is that it comes from a conceptual space where Western European nations, a lot of people, think that the idea of the nation state as understood by the Treaty of the Westphalia model, is coming to an end. At the same time, when countries in Eastern Europe, and Central and Eastern Europe, are grasping this idea like never before. So given that the Lisbon Treaty imbues the European Union with the competence of civil rights, what do you think are the civil rights consequences and the civil rights challenges faced by the European Union in the next generation?
Thank you.
It's a difficult question. So to speak about the Hungarian election, it's easier issue for me. I feel more security on that issue. Yes, we got two-thirds majority in terms of the seats of the parliament, but first past vote system we would have got more than 98%. We have a complicated system, but we have single constituencies 76, and we got 174. It's not a bad result anyway. This was not the reason why we changed the system. because we created a new system. We were the party who were absolutely satisfied with the previous one, with understandable reasons. So now we created a new system, and we cut into half the number of the seats in the House. So we reduced by 50% of the seats in the House, and we reduced by 50% of the seats in the country councils also. So we should say we cut into half the political elite in Hungary. We don't know how that change will impact on us at the next election, but you know, it will be more difficult to get the same result as we have had previously. If you are looking for the secret of that success, unfortunately, I have to confess that it plays a big role, the weakness of our opponents. And this is my answer to your question. Because democracy based on strong rivaling parties. And if one is missing, you know, it's not good for democracy. And in the long term, if you would like to maintain discourse, discussions, and arguments, and so on, you know, you need partners. And in Hungary, for several reasons, I think it's not appropriate to explain the history of the communism and post-communism in Hungary. But as the outcome of this whole process of the last 20 years, with the history of the post-communist forces, they were not strong enough to survive the crisis, and they collapsed. You know, and when a political elite is collapsing, the other political elite and political family has, you know, a far easier job. So it would be good to think that all the people voted for us because we are so good. But unfortunately, I'm not sure that this is the case. The lack of alternative played an important role. In brackets, I am not terrified by the fact that they're still in the shape as they were anyway, just half a year before the election. But in longer term, it's clear that we need real rivaling, well-shaped and well-positioned, well-programmed parties in order to maintain, you know, the real dispute, because dispute is the basis of modern democracies. So my argument against populism is discourse. Unlike many people and political leaders in Europe think that discourse, you know, discussions and arguments is good for populists and bad for those who are more seriously looking for rational arguments. But I don't think so. I think argument is good for us. So when a populistic leader is coming up to the scene and we have a serious discussion, it takes not more than several minutes that their arguments are empty. The promises are empty. So no problem. So against populism, just, you know, we should encourage the open and public discussion, as your name of institutions just exemplify for us. So don't change the name of the institution, regardless what is going on in the future in the European Union.
Thank you very much. Now, there's a gentleman here, and then we'll go back over to this side of the hall, and the gentleman in the yellow tie.
Peter Price, former member...
Sorry, no, there's a gentleman in front of you. I'm sorry.
In front? Sorry.
Yeah.
Thank you. Serge Mugaruka, I'm a Chatham House member. Just two small questions, Mr. Prime Minister. Do you think there is a need of a pan-European solution to resolve the plight of Roman gypsy, the Roman population throughout Europe and in Hungary in particular? And also, Prime Minister, can your government give any assurance to ethnic minorities wanting to invest or live in Hungary, people who, of ethnic background who love, who enjoy living in Hungary? What are the assurances you can give them to avoid any fear? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So I can't provide, or I can't argue for more than traditional values in that respect as well. You know, if it is true that traditional values and traditional value-based political parties follow the lesson of imago Dei, it's good for the minorities. So who is black and who is white, it was not our decision. It was the decision of the God. And we have to respect it. And we all belong to the imago of Dei. So therefore, I think the Christian policy is always a good policy for the minorities everywhere in Europe. That's my, you know, honest confession on that subject. And that would be good for gypsies. And that's the reason why I'm very happy that among the gypsies in Hungary, the traditional church is doing a great job to have them to integrate and to be part of the society. We should not leak that kind of social energy of the traditional churches in Hungary. Whether we need a European solution for the Romas or not? Definitely yes. Because we do not have borders anymore of the Schengen arrangement we have. You know, they are moving, or they could move. Plus, many of them are, by definition, moving people. The Hungarian gypsies are a little bit different because they are settled back to hundreds of years. But basically, now they can move. Even the settled Romas can move all around Europe. So if we find a solution for their situation, to have them to be integrated into society in Hungary, you know, and they don't like it, or they have another alternative in their minds, they can move around. So it's better to have a European approach. We provided that program. When Hungary provided the leadership for the European Council, we provided a program of the European gypsies in a European framework. I think it's not bad, but I can't say it's done, because it's a very, very long process. We are speaking about more than 10 million people all around in Europe, which has a different approach, not just, you know, to the values, but they have a different approach to how they organize their life. So it's very sophisticated job and challenge to convince them that it's better for them to be integrated more than they are at this moment. But, you know, this is the responsibility of the majority, so we have to work on that.
Thank you. Gentleman here, and then we come back to this side, and then we will come back to the back of the hall. So, please. Try to keep them fairly sharp, and then we'll fit in a few more if we can do that.
John Wilson, I'm a member of Chatham House and a journalist. Prime Minister, do you agree that the present rate of population growth is economically unsustainable in the long term?
Would you so kind to repeat the first?
He was saying that he was suggesting that population growth worldwide is unsustainable, which of course is the opposite of what you were arguing earlier about European population.
I think it's a... So to answer to that question, we need a deeper knowledge than I do have. But I have a very amateur concept on that, and I think that if I read correctly the figures, somehow in 2050 we will reach a level of population. After that, there is a chance that it will be not grow. I don't know whether it's true or not, but it's promising that somehow the globe has a self-regulation process in that sense. But I think the growing population of underdeveloped countries cannot be an argument not to help the demographic tendencies and turn the tide on that sense here in Europe. So I think we can have a problem which is worldwide, and we have a different kind of problem which is local, means European or even Hungarian. So I don't know whether you would like to react the 2 points to each other, but I would like to argue against it.
Thank you. The gentleman here, and then the lady standing at the back. So, just here. Thank you.
David Campanelli. I'm not sure what hat I'm wearing today. I should say that I'm a friend of Thesis. The question I've got is this. It's around the title of your talk, The Role of Traditional Values. For the poorest in Europe, the answer to the question, the role of traditional values in Europe's future, they will say it is to entrench the privileged rich. So in Britain, the Tax Justice Network estimates that £13 trillion is buried away in tax havens overseas by the super rich, the elite. And since 2008 in Britain, we've seen the greatest transfer of wealth from the poor to the rich through the bank bailout. The greatest transfer of wealth since the medieval age. So the question I've got is this. I don't think it helps to use this title, traditional values. Christian values perhaps, or even Christian democracy, is perhaps closer to the answer to that question about what would be fair and just for the future of Europe. And I just want to know what you, Viktor, what your ambition is within European Christian democracy to return to some of those deeper, more durable values that are perhaps closer to the answer to this question rather than tradition, which actually can work entirely the opposite direction.
Thank you very much. To answer to the last question, concerning my possible role in international arena, I should be very careful, because the question is not decided. It's unanswered, whether Hungary is a black sheep or a wise country. Therefore, the leader of the country is a stupid man or a visionary leader. So it's not clarified at this moment, internationally at least. So therefore, you know, without having a clear and positive answer to that question, you know, I'm very cautious to take any kind of international position, because I have to fight, you know, for Hungary and for the policy what we are doing. So that's, you know, more than 100% engagement for myself. Reach. Again, here a point which we understand and look at in a different way and different form. So the problem of Hungary, unlike the example you have quoted here, that we don't have rich enough number of persons. The problem is not the richness, but the lack of the rich families. That's the problem. Because we had a communist system in Hungary for 40 years. All family property were confiscated. Major companies, smaller companies, middle size were confiscated and nationalized. So therefore, we don't have an accumulation of the capital. So therefore, in Hungary, you know, it's one of the poorest countries in Europe anyway. But at the same time, I have to argue in favor of how to provide chances for the poor to become part of the middle class. But at the same time, I have to run a policy which have the riches to accumulate more capital and to be, you know, to provide a stable background and backbone for the Hungarian economy. So therefore, that's the reason why the heritage taxation in Hungary is zero. So we would like to convince the families that it has sense to accumulate generation by generation, because they have experienced just the opposite. So that's the reason why our understanding of richness and social structure is different than your challenges here in Britain, obviously because of the history. So therefore, what I'm doing in Hungary is basically arguing in favor of the middle class. You should know that in Hungary, the average income monthly on a net basis is a little bit more than 500 euro per month. 500 euro per month. And the average pension in Hungary monthly on net basis, 320 euros. Can you imagine that? So that's the reason why, you know, when I'm accused by being populistic, you know, or populist, you know, can you imagine how difficult to argue in favor of the flat tax in a country which has that kind of social background? So it's a complicated job, more complicated than it seems to be probably. So anyway, my point is that in Europe, not now leaving Hungary behind us, in Europe, it's very positive that we have a new Holy Father whose approach to this whole social question, wealth and so on, is different. I would not like to say that it would be nice to create new regulation based on their teaching or his teaching. I would not like to say that. But it's very important that now we have a voice outside the party politician landscape, you know, saying that, oh, look guys, wait a sec, stop and think. I think it's important because something should be done with that kind of distortion of the natural way of life as just you have described here.
Thank you very much. The lady at the back, and then we'll come to the gentleman in the centre who's been trying to get in for most of the meeting.
Thank you. Prime Minister, you talked a bit about the importance of emphasising, I'm Laura Smith from RT, by the way. You talked about the importance of emphasising the diversity of countries inside the EU. Meanwhile, many countries are pushing for more political and economic integration. By doing the opposite of that, do you fear that you risk isolating Hungary inside the bloc? And what could be the consequences of that?
Thank you. Political isolation in the modern world is strongly related to success. If Hungary will be a successful country, it will be not isolated. If we fail, we will.
And the gentleman here. And then we'll come to the lady sitting here.
Sulhan Khapadze, I'm a member of this institute. I must apologize if my question is a little bit off the topic. You may or may not be aware that former Prosecutor General and the Justice Minister of Georgia, who fled his country the next day after the parliamentary election and who is now charged with 4 articles of the Georgia's criminal code, including massive ill-treatment of prisoners and the abuse of power, is said to be in Hungary, successfully claimed asylum and effectively for avoiding justice. It is worth noting that Mr. Adishvili, he is one of the odious figures in Georgian politics. For example, after he fled the country, in the next few weeks, Georgian Parliamentary Committee on Human Rights identified 200 political prisoners in the country. And I have a printed copy of the report by Commissioner of Human Rights for the Council of Europe that cites the interesting statistics. When this person was a justice minister and effectively the general prosecutor in 2010, in all criminal cases, Georgia, the acquittal rate was only 0.2%, effectively meaning that for every 1,000 persons this person brought charges against, only 2 persons were acquitted in the courts.
Could you bring it to a question?
And there are also some allegations in Georgian media that as to why Mr. Adishvili chose Hungary and not other Western countries with more established democracies. And they allege that because of his close links of the high-ranking Hungarian officials. So I wouldn't ask you to comment on some speculations, but I really do hope that you will have some time in nearest future to close into this case, to see this case closed.
Thank you very much indeed.
I'm not here to look for, squabbles with any person who is nice enough to pose any question, but please, would you so kind to rethink your expression on a more established democracy? Because we think Hungary is a well-established democracy, so there is no reason to say that we are less established democracy than others, and that could be a reason for anything. So sorry for that. Politics is sometimes defined as art, as a kind of art. And just on that background you have described here, may I just say that we have the best ever bilateral relationship with the present Georgian government.
Thank you. 2 short, sharp questions, the lady here and the gentleman over here, and then we have to draw a line.
Prime Minister, my name is Jenny Taylor. I'm a religious literacy journalist. I have to say, you make talking about the Christian basis of traditional values look very easy. We live in a country where consensus is best achieved, it is thought, by not mentioning religion. I'm reminded of a Turkish taxi driver who told me that he was going back to Istanbul because he no longer knew the code here. There were so many people with different backgrounds. What advice would you have for our politicians in terms of reasserting something that we can actually get a grip on, get a hold of, in terms of values?
Thank you.
I'm not paid for giving any advice to the British anyway, so I would like to be as cautious as possible, because it's a very complicated life here, and not to live here, it's very risky to say any advice on that. Hungary is a different country in that sense. So there are 2 schools at this moment, how to organize the civilized way of living together. One is saying you should neglect your cultural background, don't speak about it. It's easier to live together. The second say, just courageously confess what you think about the basic attributes or basic things of the world. I belong to the second school. So it's not my job to advise anybody, but I think to neglect and not to speak about the real important thing in our life, it cannot be the way to live peacefully together with others who has different kind of concepts. So therefore, to confess your values, to represent it, and to argue in favor of living together with those who has different kind of concepts, that could be the way. It's very traditional, may I say, a little bit arch-conservative, but I don't have any better answer to your question. In Hungary, it's a little bit easier because, you know, ethnically and from the point of view of religious life, we are less complicated than you are. And the immigration question, therefore, it's very important. So it's very risky to have to say anything about it. All my advisors would advise just the opposite. But anyway, I think if you have a chance, and in Hungary we do have, to maintain the majority of your culture and your ethnic composition and the majority of the Hungarian, please do it. That's my advice to the Hungarians. To accept those who would like to come, to live together with them, but majority is a different issue. If the majority is not on your side in that kind of sense, your country totally changed, spiritually as well. So I try to be as rational as possible.
And the last question over here, please.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Good morning. John Algar from an organisation called Bright Blue. My question is the British Conservative Party's influence and credibility as a leading centre-right party in the European Parliament at all undermined by its lack of membership of the EPP? And as this government is about to embark on a major renegotiation process, would its prospects be aided if the major coalition party rejoined the EPP?
Limited. There's a joke among the politicians in the EPP that British are always different. And it does not help a lot to put together, an international party platform. The party life at European level is very difficult for the conservatives. I mean, EPP and the British conservatives also. It's easy for the leftists. The leftists just say, internationalism, more distribution of the wealth, and some other international proletariat background, slogans, and they know each other, and they can work together. So the ability of the left to cooperate and to accept the diversity inside their political platform is far more developed than the right. Because I would not like to insult the left, but on the right, we take seriously what we are speaking about. So, if we realize that on basic things we are differences, it's very difficult for us to cooperate. And conservatives always speak about the real important things. So therefore, to create a common platform for the right, it's very difficult in Europe. Can you imagine to have the same platform for the Portuguese conservative party, which is called Social Democratic Party anyway, which says something about the situation over there, and the British conservative, So therefore, I admire Wilfried Martens very much, who is the president of the European People's Party, who was able up to now to keep together that colorful group of parties. And we fought for years, for the British anyway, to keep them somehow inside the European People's Party network. But we have realized that it's impossible. So it does not mean that the British conservatives has no important role in the European Parliament. I'm not a parliamentarian in the European Parliament, but I have some experiences. I'm sometimes, invited to be accused. And so I have some personal experiences. And my personal experience is that the British has a voice. An important voice. Probably when they count the votes, it's not a big one. But when the argument is going on, the traditional approach of the British conservatives, the way they argument, the way how they try to be as crystal clear in their argument, that has an important impact on the European Parliament. So being outside the European People's Party does not mean that it has no sense to be part of the European Parliament on a British basis.
Victor, would you like to sit down for a moment? And I'd just like to thank you properly. Thank you.
Thank you, David.
Well, Prime Minister, your reception here today, I think perhaps rather different from your experiences in the European Parliament. And I just want to thank you for 45 minutes. You've taken questions, you've taken whatever people want to ask. A whole diverse range of issues have been brought up here today, and you've answered with candour, with frankness, and with intelligence. I think for those of us who were born in the 1950s and who have recollections of the Hungarian uprising and then lived through the 1960s and 70s and saw the dead hand of communism in Eastern European countries and the former Soviet Union, and then the game of grandmother's footsteps played out across Europe in 1989 and the collapse of the Berlin Wall, the thought in those days that we would have a democratically elected Prime Minister of Hungary here at Chatham House willing to answer in the way that you have this array of questions, I don't think many of us would have believed that some of these things would have been possible. I think that you know that in the United Kingdom, that your country, that Hungary has great respect, affection and love as well. And you will always, I know, be a very welcome visitor to the United Kingdom. Thank you very much for being here at Chatham House today, and I'd ask the audience as well to just join with me once more.
Thank you, David. Thank you for the invitation.